Hollywood doesn't want you to know. 10 darkest R&B tragedies. Behind the awards, the sold-out tours, and the timeless hits lies a side of R&B Hollywood never wanted you to see. The tragedies, the addictions, the betrayals, and the secrets that destroyed some of the greatest voices in black music history. These aren't rumors, they're the dark truths buried beneath the spotlight. At Legends of Black Excellence, we're pulling back the curtain to reveal the real stories behind the icons. If you believe their legacy deserves honesty, not sugarcoating, then hit subscribe, smash that like button, and stay with us as we uncover the 10 darkest R&B tragedies ever told. Whitney Houston. Hollywood has always celebrated the glamour of R&B royalty, but few stories expose the cost of fame more clearly than that of Whitney Houston. With a voice that critics called once in a lifetime, she soared to global superstardom, selling over 200 million records and becoming one of the most decorated artists in music history. Her success was breathtaking. Yet behind the curtain was a woman struggling to stay afloat. Years of relentless pressure, constant media scrutiny, and the expectations placed upon a trailblazing black woman created cracks that even her immense talent couldn't fill. Her marriage to Bobby Brown, though initially full of promise, quickly became a storm of conflict and emotional turmoil. Hollywood showed us the glamour, but it never wanted us to see the pain building underneath. Whitney's struggles with addiction began quietly, but grew into a battle she was never able to fully control. Cocaine, alcohol, and prescription drugs became a dangerous escape during the most stressful years of her career. As her addiction worsened, her once flawless voice began to show strain, and her public appearances revealed a woman fighting to hold on to the brilliance the world expected of her. Financial difficulties added more weight. Despite earning hundreds of millions, she reportedly faced serious money problems by the mid-2000s. It was a painful fall for someone who once stood untouchable. And here's a question for you when someone is placed on a pedestal that high. Do we forget they're human, or do we simply choose not to look deeper? Her death in February 2012 shocked the world, but tragically did not surprise those closest to her. Found in her Beverly Hills hotel room, her passing was ruled an accidental drowning with heart disease and cocaine use listed as contributing factors. It was a devastating end to a life defined by unmatched gifts and unrelenting struggles. Even more heartbreaking was the loss of her daughter, Bobby Christina, who died in eerily similar circumstances just 3 years later. Their intertwined tragedies became one of the darkest chapters in R&B history, 2 lives shaped by music fame and hardships that were far heavier than the public ever realized. Whitney's story became a symbol of how fame can magnify wounds that never had time to heal. While many R&B legends faced their own tragedies, from Marvin Gaye's fatal family conflict to Frankie Lymon's overdose at 25, none captured the world's attention or heartbreak quite like Whitney Houston. She embodied both the peak of artistic brilliance and the depths of personal despair. Hollywood continues to celebrate her voice, her legacy, her anthems, but it rarely confronts the forces that tore her life apart. Her journey stands as a powerful reminder that behind every icon is a person carrying invisible burdens. Whitney Houston didn't just make history. She revealed the price of greatness in a way the world must never forget. Marvin Gaye. When people speak of R&B's greatest storytellers, Marvin Gaye's name rises to the top with a sense of reverence. His voice carried the ache of a generation, smooth, soulful, and unfiltered. Albums like What's Going On and Let's Get It On didn't just top charts. They reshaped American music and gave a voice to social unrest, love, and longing. Hollywood loves to spotlight his genius. The 7 top 10 hits, the Grammy wins, the legacy he carved into Motown history. But behind the timeless melodies was a man quietly unraveling under the weight of expectation, heartbreak, and internal battles the industry rarely acknowledged. Fame made Marvin a legend. Life made him fragile. Throughout the late 1970s and early 1980s, Marvin struggled with heavy cocaine addiction. It chipped away at his confidence, his finances, and his mental health. After a costly divorce and tax problems, he owed the IRS more than $4.5 million, forcing him into bankruptcy. Depression tightened its grip, leaving him paranoid and restless. He often believed someone was following him, listening in, plotting against him. The pressures of fame, financial collapse, and declining health pushed him back into his childhood home, one place he hoped would bring peace. Yet it was the last place he should have been. His relationship with his father, Marvin Gaye Sr., had always been tense, built on discipline control and unresolved wounds. As tensions escalated inside the house, the atmosphere grew heavier by the day. Father and son clashed repeatedly, emotionally, verbally, and sometimes physically. Marvin was exhausted, emotionally raw, and battling addiction with every breath. Those close to him described him as haunted, a man who could still sing like an angel, but lived with the weight of every demon he had tried to outrun. And here's a question for you: when a person gives the world so much beauty, why do we so often overlook the pain they carry in silence? Hollywood celebrated Marvin the icon, but it rarely confronted Marvin the man. Everything reached a tragic breaking point on April 1st, 1984, one day before Marvin's 45th birthday. During a heated argument, Marvin's father retrieved a gun the singer had bought him as a gift years earlier and shot Marvin twice in the chest. The world lost one of its greatest voices in an instant. His death stunned fans and musicians around the globe, not just because of its violence, but because it symbolized how deeply personal tragedy can lurk behind public greatness. While other R&B legends faced their own dark fates, Marvin Gaye's story remains one of the most heartbreaking, a reminder of the fragile line between brilliance and suffering. Hollywood may celebrate his music, but it rarely confronts the truth. Marvin Gaye didn't just change R&B, he paid an unthinkable price for the art that defined him. R. Kelly. For decades, Robert Sylvester Kelly, known to the world as R. Kelly, stood among the biggest names in contemporary R&B. With multi-platinum albums, Grammy-winning hits like I Believe I Can Fly, and songwriting credits for stars from Michael Jackson to Celine Dion, he shaped the sound of the 1990s and early 2000s. Hollywood celebrated his success, promoting the polished image of a musical genius who could turn vulnerability into anthems. But behind the fame was a much darker reality, one the industry often brushed aside as long as the hits kept coming and the money kept flowing. Kelly's public triumphs hid private behavior that would eventually unravel one of the most shocking downfalls in modern music history. Rumors began circulating as early as the mid-1990s, but they were quickly overshadowed by Kelly's growing superstardom. His secret marriage to the young singer Aaliyah, who was only 15 years old at the time, briefly made headlines before being annulled. As years passed, more allegations surfaced, along with troubling stories and a growing number of lawsuits. Yet his momentum didn't falter. Hit albums went platinum, tours sold out, and major labels continued their support. For many fans, the music was so powerful that the whispers behind the scenes felt distant, disconnected from the artist they admired. But let me ask you this: how often do we ignore uncomfortable truths when they come from someone whose art we love? It was easier for the public to look away until the evidence became impossible to ignore. The turning point came with the release of a videotape in the early 2000s and a series of explosive investigations. Though Kelly was acquitted in a 2008 trial, the allegations didn't disappear. Years later, the documentary Surviving R. Kelly reignited the conversation, giving voice to individuals who had long felt unheard. This time, the world listened. Public opinion shifted rapidly. Radio stations pulled his catalog, streaming platforms removed him from playlists, and the music industry finally withdrew its protection. In 2021, Kelly was convicted in federal court on charges including racketeering and sex trafficking after decades of accusations. The following year, he was sentenced to 30 years in prison, a dramatic end to a career that once dominated R&B. R. Kelly's story stands as one of the darkest tragedies in the history of the genre, not because of personal collapse alone, but because of how long the truth remained buried beneath fame, profit, and denial. His fall forced a painful reckoning within the music industry about power, accountability, and the systems that allow harm to persist unchecked. While other R&B legends endured personal struggles or tragic circumstances, Kelly's case remains uniquely disturbing due to the scale, the duration, and the profound impact on countless lives. Hollywood may still celebrate the golden era of R&B, but it cannot erase the shadow cast by one of its most successful and most tragic figures. Bobby Womack. Bobby Womack was one of soul music's most gifted voices, an artist whose fingerprints can be found on some of the greatest records of the 20th century. He wrote hits for the Rolling Stones, crafted unforgettable soundtracks like Across 110th Street, and delivered songs that blended passion, blues, and truth in a way only he could. But behind the brilliance was a life marked by controversy, heartbreak, and decisions that permanently altered his path. Hollywood loved to praise his talent, yet it often avoided the darker, more complicated chapters of his story. Chapters that reveal how fame, grief, and human vulnerability can collide in devastating ways. The turning point came in 1965 after the shocking death of Sam Cooke, Womack's mentor and one of the greatest voices in American music. Just 3 months after Cooke was killed, Bobby, then only in his early 20s, married Cooke's widow, Barbara. The backlash was immediate and fierce. Fans accused him of betrayal, radio stations boycotted his music, and former industry allies distanced themselves. The controversy nearly destroyed his career overnight. Tensions at home soon grew worse. Barbara later discovered Bobby had become romantically involved with her teenage daughter from a previous relationship. In a moment of rage, she reportedly fired a gun at him, fortunately missing. But the damage to their relationship and his reputation was irreversible. As the years went on, Womack's career never fully recovered from the scandals. Though he continued to write, perform, and influence generations of musicians, he struggled privately with heroin addiction. The drug consumed his finances, ravaged his health, and pushed him further into isolation. It wasn't uncommon for Womack to pawn his own belongings just to get by, despite having once been one of the most in-demand guitarists and vocalists in soul music. His powerful stage presence and raw emotional delivery masked a life unraveling behind the scenes, a man trying to escape pain with substances that only pulled him deeper into it. The more he tried to revive his career, the more he found himself fighting his own shadow. In his later years, Bobby experienced a brief resurgence, especially with the release of The Bravest Man in the Universe in 2012, an album that earned critical acclaim and reminded the world of his unmatched artistic depth. But the decades of addiction, financial hardship, and emotional turmoil had taken their toll. He spent much of his final chapter in fragile health and relative solitude, a stark contrast to the bright promise of his early days with Sam Cooke. When he passed away in 2014 at the age of 70, he left behind a legacy defined by both genius and tragedy. Among the darkest R&B stories Hollywood rarely speaks of, Bobby Womack's stands out not because of scandal alone, but because of the immense talent that was swallowed by grief, controversy, and the struggle to find peace in a life that never stopped testing him. David Prater. Among the many voices that shaped the sound of American soul, David Prater's stood out for its fire, grit, and unmistakable power. As one half of the legendary duo Sam and Dave, he helped deliver some of the most unforgettable anthems of the 1960s, including Soul Man and Hold On I'm Comin'. Their performances were electrifying, earning them Grammys, national tours, and a permanent place in R&B history. Hollywood proudly celebrates the duo's success, their impact on Stax Records, and the iconic energy they brought to every stage. Yet it rarely tells the story of Prater's life after the spotlight faded, a story marked by personal battles, addiction, and a tragic end that came far from the glamour of his early fame. When Sam and Dave split in 1970, Prater struggled to find stability both musically and personally. Without the balance of Sam Moore's charisma and their legendary chemistry, Prater's solo efforts didn't connect with audiences the way the duo once had. As opportunities dried up, he turned to cocaine and alcohol, trying to fill the void left by the sudden collapse of a career that had once seemed unstoppable. These addictions began to take a toll on his relationships and his stability. Reports from the period describe a home life marked by emotional turmoil and episodes of domestic violence, painting the picture of a man overwhelmed by pressures he could no longer manage. The world remembered the energetic performer, but behind closed doors, Prater was losing control. The more he tried to rebuild his standing in the industry, the more he found himself sinking into old habits. By the 1980s, Prater was far removed from the sold-out venues and television appearances that defined his prime. He took small bar gigs and low-paid shows, performing for crowds that barely recognized his name. In 1987, he faced legal trouble when he was arrested for selling crack cocaine to an undercover officer. Though he avoided prison and received probation, the incident further damaged what remained of his career. His attempts at touring brought little success, and unlike many of his R&B peers who managed late career revivals, Prater never found the second chance that might have allowed him to reclaim his place in the spotlight. On March 30th, 1988, David Prater's story came to a quiet and heartbreaking end. While driving through Georgia, he lost control of his vehicle and crashed, dying at the age of 50. There were no major headlines, no national tributes, no industry-wide mourning, only a few brief mentions that one of soul music's most passionate voices had slipped away. His death, much like his final years, passed in near silence. Today, Hollywood continues to celebrate Sam and Dave's music, but often overlooks the tragedy behind Prater's decline. His story stands as one of the darkest R&B tragedies, not because of scandal or fame, but because of the loneliness of being forgotten. David Prater gave the world unforgettable music, yet in the end he was left fighting his battles alone, far from the stages that once made him a star. Aaron Neville. When America first heard Aaron Neville's trembling angelic tenor on the 1966 hit Tell It Like It Is, it was unlike anything the R&B world had ever experienced. His voice floated with a softness that felt almost spiritual, setting him apart from the harder-edged soul voices of the era. Hollywood has always celebrated that sound, the awards, the collaborations, the chart-topping duets with Linda Ronstadt, the global tours with the Neville brothers. But what the industry rarely highlights is the harsh, unstable life that shaped that extraordinary voice. Long before he became a Grammy winner and cultural icon of New Orleans, Aaron Neville was a young man fighting the kind of battles that almost promise a tragic ending. Neville's early years were marked by poverty, instability, and trouble with the law. As a teenager, he was arrested for car theft and possession of a gun, eventually serving time in jail. The harshness of prison life left a deep imprint on him, hardening some edges while softening others. After his release, instead of finding steady ground, he slipped into a long and painful relationship with heroin. Addiction followed him for years, draining his money, damaging relationships, and leaving him caught between his musical gift and the chaos of the world around him. On stage, he sang with breathtaking purity. Off stage, he struggled to hold his life together. His marriage grew strained under the weight of infidelity, addiction, and instability. And as if the personal turmoil weren't enough, the IRS pursued him for unpaid taxes, pushing him further into financial hardship. Through the 1970s and early 1980s, Neville drifted between small gigs, temporary labor jobs, and moments of hope, quickly overshadowed by relapse. But the turning point came from the one place that had always anchored him: family. Supported by his brothers and encouraged to reclaim the potential everyone saw in him, Neville finally committed to treatment and broke free from heroin after many long years. His recovery aligned with the rise of the Neville brothers as an international touring act. Their concerts became legendary for blending funk soul and New Orleans rhythm into something uniquely powerful. And Aaron, with his unmistakable voice, suddenly had a second chapter built not on escape, but on survival. He began rebuilding his finances, repairing relationships, and reconnecting with the world in a way addiction had long prevented. By the time he recorded Don't Know Much with Linda Ronstadt in 1989, a song that won a Grammy and became a defining moment of his career, Aaron Neville had already lived through more darkness than many R&B artists ever speak about. Hollywood often frames him as the gentle voice of New Orleans, but rarely as the man who clawed his way out of jail cells, addiction debt, and broken relationships to find peace later in life. Among the tragedies that haunt R&B history, Neville's story stands apart. It contains the familiar shadows, struggle, hardship, and loss, but it also carries something the others often don't: a true redemption. His journey reminds us that some R&B legends fall and some, against all odds, rise again. Frankie Lymon. Before R&B had fully taken shape, before Motown ruled the airwaves, a 13-year-old boy from Harlem stepped onto the stage and changed American music forever. His name was Frankie Lymon, and his voice, bright, youthful, impossibly pure, soared through radios across the country with the 1956 hit, "Why Do Fools Fall in Love?" Practically overnight, Frankie became the first black teenage pop idol adored by young fans and respected by seasoned musicians. Hollywood and the record labels celebrated his charm and star power, but what they didn't show was how vulnerable he was behind the scenes. He wasn't protected, mentored, or guided. Instead, he was a child in an adult world surrounded by people more interested in profit than in safeguarding his future. From the start, Frankie was heavily exploited. While the teenager's records sold hundreds of thousands of copies, he earned only small allowances, sometimes as little as $10 a week. He didn't own his guitar, he didn't control his schedule, and he certainly didn't understand the business he was suddenly trapped in. During these chaotic early years on tour, curiosity and exposure to the wrong environment led him into heroin use at an age when most kids are still in middle school. By 14, addiction had begun digging its roots into his life. When his dependency worsened and his behavior became unpredictable, labels distanced themselves, and even his own group removed him. The boy who once brought joy to millions was left drifting without a support system, financial guidance, or emotional protection. As his career unraveled, Frankie made several desperate decisions to survive. Among them was repeatedly selling away his songwriting rights, sometimes using forged signatures, just to get quick money for his next fix. Those rights would later be worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, but he never saw the benefit. His personal relationships suffered too. By his mid-20s, he had gone through 3 marriages, all strained by instability, financial trouble, and addiction. He tried to make a comeback, checking into rehabilitation in 1968. It was a brief spark of hope, the kind of turn Hollywood loves to dramatize. But unlike the movies, real life didn't give him the redemption arc he fought for. On February 27, 1968, Frankie Lymon was found dead on his grandmother's bathroom floor, a victim of a heroin overdose. He was just 25 years old. There were no major tributes, no national mourning, only a quiet end to a voice that had once captivated the nation. Hollywood remembers the hit song, the smiling teenager, the novelty of young stardom, but it rarely acknowledges the truth. Frankie was a child star failed by the very system that profited from him. His tragedy, among the darkest in early R&B history, is a stark reminder that fame without protection can be deadly, especially when placed on the shoulders of a boy who never had a chance to grow up. James Brown. Few entertainers in American history achieved the electricity, influence, and longevity of James Brown. Widely known as the Godfather of Soul, he transformed R&B with hits like "I Got You, I Feel Good," "Papa's Got a Brand New Bag," and "It's a Man's World." His stage presence rewrote the rules of performance, inspiring entire generations of musicians from soul to funk to hip-hop. Hollywood loves this version of James Brown, the unstoppable performer, the cultural pioneer, the man who turned rhythm into revolution. But behind the brilliance was a turbulent private life, marked by addiction, violence, and chaos, parts of his story that the public rarely saw and the industry often avoided discussing. Brown's struggles with drugs escalated during the late 1970s and 1980s. Cocaine and PCP in particular became dangerous fixtures in his life, fueling paranoia and unpredictable behavior. As his dependency deepened, the pressures of fame, relentless touring, and personal conflicts pushed him further off balance. His temper, already legendary, grew even more volatile under the influence. Family members, friends, and employees often found themselves caught in the crossfire of a man battling both internal demons and the expectations of an empire he built on sheer willpower. Legal troubles began to mount, and the once celebrated superstar increasingly found his name linked to disturbing incidents and domestic turmoil. One of the most infamous episodes came in 1988, when Brown stormed into an insurance seminar carrying a shotgun after someone allegedly used his private restroom. What followed was a dramatic high-speed car chase across state lines involving both Georgia and South Carolina police. The event ended with his arrest and a sentence of 6 years in prison. Brown ultimately served 27 months, but the damage to his public image was significant. The incarceration also revealed how fragile he had become physically, mentally, and emotionally. While he returned to performing after his release, the fire that once drove his career no longer burned as brightly, and the cracks in his personal life became increasingly visible. In his later years, Brown faced ongoing family disputes, financial difficulties, and declining health. The once energetic performer grew frail, his body worn down by years of addiction, exhaustion, and stress. When he died on December 25, 2006, he reportedly weighed little more than 110 pounds, a painful contrast to the powerhouse entertainer who had once commanded stages around the world. Yet even in death, controversy followed him, legal battles over his estate, questions about his final days, and unresolved tensions among relatives. Hollywood continues to celebrate the legacy, the music, the influence. But behind the curtain lies one of R&B's darkest tragedies. James Brown was a man who gave everything to the world, energy, innovation, and culture, while privately fighting a storm that ultimately consumed him. Rick James. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, few performers embodied the electric energy of funk and R&B quite like Rick James. With his flamboyant style, leather-clad persona, and hits like Super Freak and Give It To Me Baby, Rick became a cultural phenomenon. Fans saw him as bold, untouchable, and larger than life, a man who lived on the edge and made music that pulsed with rebellion. Hollywood loved promoting this version of him, the innovator, the showman, the hitmaker who helped reshape Motown for a new generation. But hidden behind the stage lights and outrageous costumes was a man losing control, pulled deeper into excess addiction and a lifestyle that quickly turned from glamorous to destructive. James's struggles with drugs began early and escalated rapidly as fame intensified. Cocaine became a constant presence, fueling marathon parties and chaotic behavior that pushed friends, collaborators, and even record executives to their limits. His talent never disappeared, but the discipline that had built his early success slowly eroded under the weight of addiction. As the years passed, he became notorious for his unpredictable temper and confrontational personality traits that only grew worse when paired with heavy substance use. What the public saw as eccentric rock star behavior was in reality a growing storm consuming a once gifted artist from the inside out. His darkest chapter arrived in the early 1990s when Rick James faced serious criminal charges related to assault and holding a woman against her will during a drug-fueled episode. The case shocked both fans and the industry, marking a dramatic turning point in his public image. Once celebrated as a boundary-pushing icon, he was now seen as a symbol of excess, gone horribly wrong. In 1993, James was convicted and later sentenced to prison, an experience that forced him to confront the consequences of years of unchecked addiction and destructive behavior. Though he attempted a career revival after his release, the music industry had changed, and so had he. His health had deteriorated, and the fire that once powered his performances no longer burned with the same intensity. On August 6, 2004, Rick James died at the age of 56. The autopsy revealed multiple substances in his system, though officials ruled the cause of death as heart failure. The presence of 9 different drugs, none at lethal levels, highlighted the long-term toll addiction had taken on his body. His passing closed the final chapter of a life defined by musical innovation and personal chaos. Hollywood continues to celebrate the outrageous character he portrayed, but often avoids the tragic truth. Rick James was a man whose brilliance was overshadowed by addiction and self-destruction. Among R&B's darkest tragedies, his stands out as a cautionary tale about the dangers of fame without boundaries and the human cost hidden behind the wild, unforgettable persona that the world thought it knew. Ike Turner. Ike Turner's name is woven deeply into the history of American music. His 1951 recording Rocket 88 is often cited by historians as one of the earliest rock and roll tracks, and his later partnership with Tina Turner produced some of the most electrifying performances of the 20th century. Hollywood celebrates him as a pioneering musician, a band leader who helped ignite the soul and R&B explosion that shaped modern music. But beneath the groundbreaking achievements lay a far darker reality, one that the entertainment world often softens or sidesteps. Behind the scenes, Ike battled addiction, personal turmoil, and a violent temperament that cast a long shadow over every chapter of his life. By the late 1960s and 1970s, Turner's dependence on drugs began spiraling out of control. Cocaine became a destructive force that fueled erratic behavior, paranoia, and emotional instability. As addiction tightened its grip, it magnified the worst aspects of his personality, poisoning relationships and undermining the very foundation of his success. Nowhere was this more tragically evident than in his marriage to Tina Turner. Their partnership on stage was electric, but at home the relationship was marked by control manipulation and episodes of violence that Tina later courageously spoke about in her memoir and interviews. As Ike's drug use escalated, so did the volatility, creating an environment of fear and despair that ultimately drove Tina to leave in 1976, an escape that took enormous courage and marked the end of one of music's most iconic duos. After the split, Ike Turner's life continued to descend into turmoil. His reputation deteriorated rapidly, and the industry that once celebrated him soon distanced itself. Arrests for drug possession throughout the 1980s and 1990s further eroded his public standing. Legal troubles, financial problems, and fractured family relationships created a turbulent existence that left him isolated from the mainstream music world he had once helped shape. Even as he attempted comebacks, addiction repeatedly pulled him back into chaos. While he did briefly re-emerge in 2001 with a Grammy-winning collaboration, the redemption was short-lived. Years of heavy cocaine use had done irreversible damage to his health career and legacy. Ike Turner died on December 12, 2007, at the age of 76. The coroner's report confirmed that cocaine toxicity contributed to his passing, closing the final chapter of a life marked by both musical brilliance and profound personal darkness. Hollywood continues to honor his influence on R&B, soul, and rock and roll, but seldom confronts the full complexity of his story. The tragedy of Ike Turner isn't just one of addiction. It is the story of a man whose immense talent was overshadowed by the pain he inflicted and the demons he never overcame. In the broader landscape of R&B's darkest tragedies, his legacy remains one of the most troubling, reminding us that musical genius does not excuse human failings and that the stories behind the songs are often far more complicated than the industry ever lets us see. Donny Hathaway. Before the storms of R&B fame claimed so many lives, there was Donny Hathaway, a voice so heavenly that critics often described it as the closest thing to pure light. His music carried a warmth that soothed generations, a song for you. Someday we'll all be free, and unforgettable duets with Roberta Flack, like Where Is the Love, which won a Grammy and became an enduring classic. Hollywood praises his genius, the tenderness of his delivery, the brilliance of his arrangements. But what the industry rarely reveals is the profound suffering that followed Hathaway behind every stage curtain. Beneath the beauty of his sound was a life overshadowed by mental illness, isolation, and a fate that remains one of R&B's most heartbreaking tragedies. In the early 1970s, at the height of his career, Hathaway was diagnosed with severe paranoid schizophrenia. The illness began creeping into rehearsals, recording sessions, and even friendships. He suffered vivid delusions, hearing voices that attacked his confidence and fed his fears. Those close to him described moments when he believed people were plotting against him, or that hidden forces were trying to manipulate his music. As episodes worsened, his ability to perform consistently became increasingly fragile. He moved in and out of treatment, but the pressure of fame combined with the stigmas surrounding mental health, especially for black men, left him with few safe places to turn. Hollywood applauded his talent, but quietly looked away from the crisis unfolding in his private life. By the late 1970s, Hathaway's condition had grown more severe. Once thriving collaborations became strained, and he struggled to maintain control over the art that had once been his sanctuary. Financial problems added more weight, and his relationships suffered under the pressure of unpredictability and emotional turmoil. Still, flashes of brilliance continued to shine through. In 1978, Warner Brothers brought him back into the studio to record again with Roberta Flack, hoping to revive the magic of their earlier work. The sessions showed promise, but Hathaway's paranoia resurfaced intensely, so much so that one day he abruptly left the studio convinced someone was trying to harm him. It was a haunting signal of just how deeply his illness had taken hold. On January 13, 1979, Donny Hathaway was found dead beneath the 15th floor window of his New York hotel room. His death was ruled a suicide, though friends and family struggled to accept the tragedy of a man who had given the world so much compassion through his art. He was only 33 years old. Hollywood continues to celebrate the beauty of his music, but seldom speaks openly about the silent battle he fought against a relentless mental illness, a battle he ultimately lost. Among R&B's darkest tragedies, Donny Hathaway's story remains one of the most devastating, not because of scandal or self-destruction, but because it reminds us how fragile brilliance can be when the world refuses to understand the pain behind it. In the end, the lives of these artists remind us that greatness often walks beside unimaginable struggle. Their music shaped generations, yet their pain was too often ignored, hidden, or dismissed by an industry built on fame over humanity. At Legends of Black Excellence, we honor both the triumphs and the truths, because understanding the full story is the only way to truly respect their legacy. Now the question is yours to answer: should we celebrate the art while condemning the darkness, or is the legacy of these legends forever tied to both?